All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Rats. Ben, we're talking football today. How you doing, brother?
Dude, I'm excited, honestly. I needed the off season, at least this little bit of a break to get over the heartbreak. Am I over it? No, but I am ready to get back into it, and I'm just super stoked for the draft, to be honest with you.
Agreed. It's that time. And for those of you who are listening on audio, come check us out on YouTube. We're adding new stuff as we get, progress here on this podcast. So if you're not following us already, give us a like, subscribe, all that fun jazz. And we have a lot in store for today. So today we're going to be doing a mock draft, just kind of an example for what we think our teams will pick for tomorrow because we're recording on Wednesday night. The draft is tomorrow on Thursday. So the mock draft is going to be kind of a weird simulation, and we'll talk about it more as we go. But we're going to talk draft prospects who we're excited for and who we would love to see join our teams. So it's nice. It's nice wearing the jersey. It's nice having the Eagles colors behind me. I'm hyped. I'm ready. So before we get into all that draft talk, we got news. We haven't spoken, we haven't talked football in a while. So let's start with some fun news on the Niners side of things. So Ben, there's been a lot of discourse, and we've been talking about this since the end of the Super Bowl. Was this Brandon Aiyuk's end of was he done in San Francisco? And you were going in early on, you were pretty confident that he was going to be coming back. He hasn't signed a deal, and that's been the thing that's been lurking in the distance. And we have some takes on this, but let's talk about the Detroit Lions signing Amon Ra St. Brown to a 4-year, $120 million deal, makes him the highest
Oof.
paid receiver in the NFL. And he has $77 million in guaranteed money, which is the most in NFL history for a non QB. What do you think about this move and how it might affect Brandon Ayuk's future in San Francisco, or what that means for him?
I mean, it just means that it really just means that John Lynch once again waited a little bit longer than he should have, and it's frustrating in that regard because it's one of those situations where, when you have talent and you want to hold on to that talent, and you know that a certain market for a position for a player is going to get more and more expensive as seasons progress. Why not try and lock them up sooner? Especially knowing there's contracts out there that were waiting to be signed going into this offseason. So a little frustrating from that end of things. I think this contract it definitely affects the Niners, and it could very well play into whether there's a trade that goes down tomorrow or not. I think prior to this, the chances of a trade were I would say a lot less than they are now.
If you had to, ballpark a percentage, what do you think before the deal today versus now the deal? What is the percentage that you think it'd be traded? Do you think it's like crazy high, or do you think it's 50-50 style?
I think it's still below 50%, to be honest with you. But prior to this deal being done for Amon Ra St. Brown, I would have given it probably about a 15 to 20% chance of that deal being done. It was just because that asking price from the 49ers, like they wanted a first round pick. And there was a report that came out from an anonymous executive who that executive is in the market for a wide receiver of this star level talent. Okay. And he hit the Niners up, called their phone, and the Niners said, "We need a first round pick." And they wouldn't budge on it. And that executive said, like, their asking price is way too much. Well, if you don't want to, it's the same deal as what happened with Debo. If you don't want to offer that, that's fine. We know what we have. We know what we're not going to settle for. And that's something that I'm really hoping the Niners, kind of stick to their guns on. But then you see a deal like this go down, and you're like, wow, now I'm going to have to pay Brandon Aiyuk, who we still haven't even given that true wide receiver one shot yet. We're going to have to pay him wide receiver one money because we know what he can be capable of and what he's already proven as a wide receiver two option. So It's I would say tomorrow, given that deal being done now, I give it like a 40% chance of a trade happening. And that's unfortunately high for a player of his caliber, because there are teams right now in with a good first round pick, with a high first round pick, who are in the market for a wide receiver. And when they see that a guy like Brandon Aiyuk is out there, and you know what the asking price is, and you saw what just happened in that contract in Detroit, it seems a little more likely that the Niners might settle for something a little farther back.
Yeah, and it really does depend. Again, you're right. No trade is going to happen tomorrow with BA that doesn't involve at least a first round pick. And if they have to settle, they'd probably settle for like a first rounder plus a future third rounder or something like that. But then they can
Yeah.
package those two first rounders, move up, and maybe draft one of those top three receivers that were on the board. But it is all speculation. It does. This is tough, and I wanted to, this the whole way that the Niners and teams like the Cowboys do business is like so interesting to me because I'm not here to crap on it or anything. I'm just like from a fan perspective, from somebody who follows the league and how certain teams do business, like the Philadelphia Eagles, it's just kind of stunning to me. Like you watch the Eagles set the tone. So Hassan Reddick got traded, and that's kind of a slightly off topic, but some people would view that as a bad move, right? And there's reasons for us getting rid of our best defensive player in a year of flux. Like we'll touch more on that later, but one another move that they made recently was they re-signed Devontae Smith, attaboy Smitty, to a 3 year, $75 million extension. And why it's 3 years is because he still has one more year on his rookie contract. He's not even done with that yet, versus guys like Brandon Aiyuk, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, who are all entering the final year of their rookie deals. And you're watching a guy like Devontae who entered, so him and Ayuk entered the league at the same time. But Devontae's proven to be a very capable receiver, an elite receiver, and you're pairing him up with AJ Brown, who's also a wide receiver one, and Devontae's been able to put up awesome numbers. So I think the difference between like a guy like John Lynch or Jerry Jones versus Howie Roseman is when Howie knows his talent is showing out and they're legit, he's signing them right away. And he signs them at almost a discount because he's doing it before everyone else. Like the 3 year $75 million extension puts him at the range where now him and AJ are almost identical, only AJ has slightly more guarantees. So you're paying two wide receiver one money, but you're still paying it at a level where come next 2 3 years, $100 million for these guys over 4 years is not going to be that much. And then you see a guy like Amon Ra St. Brown get signed for 120 million, and now the asking price for CeeDee Lamb goes up. Price for Brandon Aiyuk goes up when both teams had the opportunity to sign their guys sooner rather than later. But so I just find it so weird because like the Eagles had this issue with like Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts, right? Carson Wentz, you signed to a big deal, all of a sudden it doesn't work out, right? And people think like, oh, you don't want to make that risk, but smart teams, good teams figure out ways around that. You we survived the Carson Wentz deal, ended up with Jalen Hurts. We paid him a ton of money because it ended up working out. And if Jalen Hurts doesn't work out, we would probably figure out a way out of that too, because that's just how Howie Roseman does business. He understands the cap. And it also does help that Jeffrey Lurie is willing to shell out a little extra cash too. So I also think that, that does play a factor in it. I'm not going to pretend like I don't know how much is in each of these guys' bank accounts and how much they owe salary cap wise, but it is interesting to see. And it sucks for the Niners fans, because you guys love BA. BA is a quality top 5, top 10 receiver. And the opportunity was just sitting there for you guys. And now, instead of paying him Devontae Smith level money, you're going to have to pay him in between or maybe even equal to Amon Ra St. Brown and above Devontae Smith. So instead of a $25 million deal, you're going to have to pay him anywhere between $28 to $32 million a year. And that's where you're like, oh, is it worth it when it was worth it months ago? So that's where I find it to be different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously this Niners team is full of stars from top to bottom, and they're being paid like stars from top to bottom. Um, and the more and more money that you have to pay Brandon Aiyuk and guys like that, like down the road, you're not going to be able to hold on to as many players. And we got to keep in mind, like Brock's contract is coming up too. We're going to need to pay Brock, and Brock is going to be the probably the highest paid on the team is my guess.
At that time too.
Mm-hmm.
So
And so that's going to be a hit for sure. That obviously super teams can never last forever. I do expect, and I've said it before, I expect some of these guys who are on the team now to not be here in a couple years. I hate to think about the idea that Brandon Aiyuk might be the start of it, but when you sit on something like this for as long as John Lynch has, like you have one of these situations where now the same guy who put the same stats 2 months ago is more expensive than he was, 2 weeks ago. He's more expensive now than
yeah,
he was 2 weeks ago, and he's been sitting on his couch. And that's theoretically, right? But
right, of course.
it's 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 frustrating. From a fan perspective, I'm like, pay the damn guy at this point. Like, this is ridiculous. You know what you have in BA. I have said before, like, I would still be happy running Brock in BA because I feel confident in that duo. And look, I would love to keep Debo. Debo is super, super duper important to this team. And I believe this season, like, he was one of the MVPs for this team. We said it when he went out, right? But
Right.
it's one of these situations, man. You have youth in Brandon Aiyuk. Debo's starting to get banged up. That guy literally runs into people. He trucks people. That is his game. It's yards after catch. It's contact. Like, that is how the guy plays. Brandon, he's shifty. He'll break your ankles and get separation. That is something that the route running, the catching, the consistency, that's something that you pay as soon as you can. So to sit on something
Exactly.
like that is definitely frustrating.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and we'll see tomorrow if something like that happens. And again, it's most likely not going to happen, but now that possibility becomes even more likely, and you don't want to be in that
Yeah.
scenario because that's just all the vibes around it. Like, vibes are important in sports. When you have guys who are unhappy, it's just a sign of kind of bad business. Like, that's a way to, you want to show, if you want guys to come to your team, you want to know, as a player, that you're going to get treated well. And, people like to come to Philly because when they get paid well, and they get paid correctly, and they're treated like the stars that they're paying for. So it's interesting. So, we'll definitely keep an eye on that um moving forward. But those are kind of the big storylines that we've, seen over the past couple weeks. And we'll see. Hopefully this deal gets done sooner rather than later, and hopefully it's at a reasonable price. And honestly, I still wouldn't be mad if, even if I were you guys, I wouldn't be mad if you signed him. The only thing I'd be bummed out about is, like, we could have done this sooner if you were going to sign him. So what are we doing here? And part of that could have been
Right.
Brandon too. Part of that could have been like his agent just saying, "Hey, you know, they didn't want to pay you
Let's
earlier.
sit on
Let's just
this.
sit. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
let's wait a little bit and see what we can get out of this, and make the Niners pay it because they didn't treat him the way they should have earlier." So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I mean,
Mm.
there's always reports on these kind of things, right? But I know that they've already been discussing things, and I know that a couple weeks ago they weren't close on anything. And that's kind of the way the Niners do business. Like, I don't want to say they lowball, but they start at a price and they go from there. And eventually you get paid the same way as you would like on Philly, but it's just a matter of, like, Philly tends to start closer to what you deserve, and I feel like the
Yeah,
Niners probably don't, and that's why you see a situation like Nick Bosa getting his contract a week before week one of the season last year. You know what I mean? Like, that kind of thing you'll never see happen in Philly. These kind of things get done early on, and that's just, it's a difference in the way that the two organizations do business. Ultimately, like, they know how to build teams, they know how to pay guys. It's just the process in getting to those is so polar opposite.
yeah. And it's something that, I didn't really pay attention to all that stuff until I got older and I realized the impact that it has. And, the fact that the Eagles, have been able to build a super team offensively and we still have over $31 million of cap space. This is including all the signings and stuff. That's just, and obviously some of that comes void years, and like we're saving money, we're borrowing from the future, so it's going to hit us a little harder later. But we do that with all of our guys, and that's just how we have built teams, and it's worked. So it keeps guys happy, and it's also, there are two sides of the coins. The Niners wait until they know they have a guaranteed product, which is also a perfect way of totally fine way of doing business, while the Eagles could, and at times, jump the gun a little bit. Like, had they waited one more year on Carson, that ACL injury would have happened, and then they wouldn't have felt the need to most likely pay him as early as they did.
Right.
So, and the Niners with the Brock situation, it is a little tougher because he's not a first rounder, so he doesn't get that extra year.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucks too, because then you fall into the whole franchise tag category, and then all of a sudden you're the Cowboys and you're franchising, Dak, and then you'll franchise CD, and then these guys are trapped, and then you're stuck, and then you owe them way more money, and like
Mm-hmm.
they can't pay CD and Dak and Micah because of all the franchise tagging they did on Dak. So it's just like that's just bad business, and so that's where the financials of it all does make things difficult. But fortunately for us, our teams are good at team building. As different as they might be, it's still, at the end of the day, our two teams were both in the Super Bowl in the past 2 years. So, something is happening correctly. So,
Yeah, for sure.
well, some would say that good starts to every season starts in the draft. So let's move on here to the mock draft portion of it. So Ben and I have targets. We have players that we're like, oh, we would love to see these guys on our rosters. It'd be really cool. Hope, obviously the draft is always so hit and miss. There's no guarantee that any of these guys will end up panning out. And there's no guarantee at all. This is just a random mock simulator. And this one that I'm about to load up here is the Pro Football Network mock draft simulator. And this one, Ben and I kind of practiced on this a few times, and it's a little wonky in terms of like who's going where. It's not like they don't have Vegas betting odds, so you're gonna see a couple weird ones in there as we go. So it's just gonna simulate up until our picks. Each of our teams have 3 picks in the first 3 rounds, which is only what we're doing here. We didn't want to go through a whole 7 round mock when so much can happen. But a lot of our favorite guys within the first kind of 3 rounds that we can see going early, we're going to talk about and, go into it and see what kind of moves our teams would make. So we're just going to run it here. We're not going to do any trade ups and stuff. We can do that. You're allowed to propose trades and stuff, and you're going to see trades alongside these teams here, because it'll automatically do it. So that's fine. Some of these trades are a little weird, and some stuff you wouldn't see that wouldn't match what would happen in real life. So we're just gonna play it as is and talk about who we would like in within this range, or if we would trade up, what we would do. So you ready to kick it off, Ben?
Yeah, I think before we do though, I want to ask you. So the I know kind of I have three positions that I want filled with the draft. Um,
Hmm.
specifically for the Niners. I want to know from you, like, I know we're in a similar situation, but I'm curious, do you have like a most important position need filled? Like, what are your top two, top three, and what do you think?
I think for the Eagles, the top 3 positions of need are cornerback, offensive line, and I would say linebacker, but this linebacker class isn't the greatest, so we might draft one. I'm not going to be surprised if we do draft one, but I would say defensive line would actually be our third most important of the 3. Given the
Yeah,
talent that's in
and
this
that's
draft, yeah, that's how I would see it.
that's a really safe bet, honestly. Yeah, there's not many linebackers in this one. It's kind of a mid linebacker class, which is unfortunate
Hmm.
because I know the Eagles were in a market for a future linebacker. But it's a similar situation to the Niners. For me, it's cornerback, offensive tackle, and wide receiver. And I mean,
Makes sense.
wide receiver thing, a lot banks on Brandon Aiyuk, but regardless, like we really only have three receivers, and our third is Juwan Jennings, who his contract is up soon too. So Like, we're going to
Hmm.
need a wide receiver 3, and we might need a wide receiver 2, depending on what happens. So that's something like
Exactly.
going into this draft, I had to focus on wide receivers for sure. But cornerbacks and offensive tackles, traditionally, the Niners, they always draft defensive tackles or defensive ends, like it's edge rushers. Like they want to, they've been searching for the guy to put next to Bosa on the other side ever since they got Bosa, and they just
Right.
haven't gotten that hit. So I wouldn't be surprised if we take another edge rusher early on in this draft, because it's historically it's something the Niners love to do. They love to take that chance, and unfortunately, it just hasn't worked out so far. So yeah, I'm going to take what I feel is best, but I'm sure the Niners will probably do something entirely different come draft day.
Right, exactly. And that's the same thing. And again, we have to emphasize that this board is going to come out really weird. So it's not going to be as realistic as we'd like it to, but that's also all the fun of it too, because we can kind of come up with different scenarios. We might run through it twice depending on
Yeah,
how awkward this first one comes out, because there are a lot of guys that we have in mind that we can, theoretically see on our team. So we're gonna talk different scenarios and we're just gonna run through it, see what happens. But I agree that like for the Eagles, like our biggest need would be in theory cornerback, but we haven't drafted a cornerback in the first round since 2004. Not for lack of trying, not because the Eagles haven't wanted guys, but it's just that's just how the board fell. And I wouldn't be surprised if we drafted another offensive lineman or another defensive lineman. That's just given how this offseason has been for the Eagles with who we've lost, it makes sense too. So, we're still
yeah,
going to pick based off of how we think at the end of the day, but we're also going to talk about like what we think our teams would do in this scenario with these picks, with the players that are available. Okay. All right, let's see how this goes. We're just
let's
going to
do it.
fire it off, hope for the best. Let's see. Okay, so far so good. Hey, that's oh, the Giants guy's a little weird. Wow, Latu went 8th. That's nuts. Okay. Oh, this is already hurting me. Some of these make sense. Okay. I'm already liking where this is
Actually,
going. And also,
there's a
yeah.
good amount in there that actually I could see happening.
Right, exactly. It made perfect sense. And by the way, Ben, if for some reason you want to take an offer that you see on the board, have some fun with it. Totally up to you. So I'm just
Perfect.
going to reject all these because they're terrible. So there's one name on this list, and I'll go through a couple options here because let's pretend in this scenario here. So on the offensive line side of things, the Eagles have been linked to Oklahoma's Tyler Guyton. Him and Lane Johnson are exceptionally close as like a mentor type of vibe. Me personally, I don't like him that much. I think that there's, for at least for an Eagles fit for me, I can see why the Eagles would take him, but I do believe that there's other guys out here. Graham Barton's a good name. Jackson Powers Johnson's a good name to look out for. But I think for the Eagles, if this man is on the board, I'm gonna pick him, and he's listed as a safety here, but he can play corner, he can play outside corner, inside, and he can play safety. I'm gonna draft Cooper DeJean from Iowa. He's been one of my favorite targets in this entire draft process. This dude's an athlete. I'm excited to see if he ends up on this team. I'm going to be happy because we could put him in so many different spots. So that would be my pick in this situation. And he's been linked to the Eagles. He's visited the Eagles on the guys on the Eagles top 30 visits. And for those who don't know what top 30 visits are, every team gets 30 prospects that they can pick during a draft process to come visit the team, interview, and talk to, get a feel for the guys. So Cooper DeJean was one of these guys, and I would totally take him if he was available in the scenario. Okay, so
It's a good
we
pick.
got Ben. What do you think? Rejecting?
Yeah, I'm rejecting all that.
Perfect. Yep. I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what position were we looking for here again? Let's go all. It's kind of. So those are the top
So
guys that are listed here.
yeah, and I'm gonna be honest with you. Jackson Powers is definitely somebody that I can see the Niners drafting with this pick. Um,
Hmm.
Kyle needs a center and somebody who's reliable like that. And Jackson Powers he could fit this scheme really well. He could fit in with Kyle really well. Like, he's moldable. He can fit in pretty much anything you do. So
Hmm.
I that's tempting.
Let's
I'm not
take a
gonna
look.
lie. Go to
Let's
defense
take a
for
look
me.
at. Yeah, I got you. Any position in particular?
Go ahead and do cornerback to start.
Okay, so here are our corners that we have.
I really like
Then we
Mike
have.
Sainer still, and I
Oh
like
yeah,
TJ
he's a.
Tampa, but
We also have
go to edge.
edge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can definitely see us taking Darius Robinson too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And then we also have the big defensive tackle Byron Murphy, who some list as
mm,
one of the best in this class, somehow still here. See, that's the thing with some of these things,
yeah,
you'll get random ones in here.
do offense and go.
Mm-hmm.
Let's peep wide receiver just for fun.
Got you. So that's who's available.
I could see Xavier too.
Yeah, I know, right? And then any other positions you were curious about?
Go. You know what? Actually, let's just go back to all, and let's take Jackson Powers. I'll be
All
happy with
right.
that.
So that'll be your first pick. Perfect. So now
Mm-hmm.
we'll run through. So now our picks are going to get a little distorted here. I think the Eagles have the 50th and the 53rd pick. So that's the advantage I'll have in this draft process that we got going on here. So this part, the later rounds, the early, second, third round, this is where things can go sideways or things can get a little crazy. I'm going to reject that. And I'm going to reject that. And for those who are on audio and want to see exactly what we're doing here, we are screen sharing. So if you check us out on YouTube, you can totally see and follow along with us as we go through this process. So Eagles on the board at 50. I'm looking at all here. And again, I ended up taking Cooper DeJean. So there's a lot of ways this could go based off of who we have here. So on the offensive side of the ball, I'm going to look at who's available as a tackle and who's available on the guards. So Cooper Beebe has visited, Christian Mahogany has visited, Roger Rosengarten has visited the Eagles. Those are all good options. In terms of the offensive line, those would be the guys I would consider in this range. And then let me check here. So Marshawn Nealon has visited the Eagles from Western Michigan. And then when you look at the linebackers, we've had Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is the son of former Philadelphia Eagle Jeremiah Trotter, the Axe Man. It would be really cool to get him. I don't think they would go this high. He's probably going to be a third or fourth round pick. Um, but I also would not be upset if we ended up with him. Now I like Mike San still, but at the same time, it's like we already got DeJean, so there's I doubt that we
Yep.
would double dip. I would only see us double dipping in terms of getting a safety, maybe De'Aaron Taylor Demerson from Texas Tech or Javon Bullard. Those would be two guys I would see us getting later. But if I'm looking for, gosh, I'm like, who would, in my opinion, would be the the Howie Roseman guy, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
I look at a guy like Cooper Beebe, who is like a guard, I could see him going because of his physical tools. I also really like Patrick Paul because he's just like a giant man with great movement. That's the exact kind of player I could see him getting. But I think for this scenario, I'm going to draft Cooper Beebe out of Kansas State because I'm picking in two picks here. So I have a little bit of leeway here. So let's see. Cleveland's offering me this trade. In real life, I actually probably would take this trade. So you know
That's
what?
not a
I'm going to
bad
accept it.
trade. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I get a future third, so I'm going to take that. I would totally do this, but I think moving back too far, I don't want to do right now. So now I'm sitting here again, and if I look at like wide receiver, Lad McConkey's still on the board. He's not an Eagles guy per se, um, but that's definitely a name to look at. I think on this one, I'm gonna go defense, and I'm gonna take a look here. This would be the spot where I wouldn't be surprised if they took a linebacker. And if there was one linebacker of this group of Peyton Wilson from NC State, Cedric Gray from North Carolina, Junior Colson from Michigan, and Trayvon Wallace from Kentucky, Trayvon and Junior have visited the Eagles. So based off of that, I would think the guy who I would take a flyer on would be Junior Colson from Michigan. I think he fits the project style of a linebacker that we could need. He has good size. He has teachable tools. It's just going to be a matter of will he can he learn how to play with his size? That's been his issue. He doesn't really understand how to use his size correctly. So once I think that can be taught, and he is a good project player that could technically he's good enough to where he could be on the field and develop on the fly. So I would take him with that pick. All right, so let's. I'm assuming reject that. Yeah,
Yeah, reject that. Reject that.
perfect. All right,
Not bad though.
so let's see. Let's go all
Go
here.
to go to cornerback for me.
Go to cornerback. Okay,
Dang,
so here's who we're dealing with
TJ
now.
got taken.
Yeah, I'm trying to think too. There's some safeties. I don't know if you want
Um,
those either.
is Jalix Hunt out there? He was an edge.
An edge. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he is.
Okay.
We got Jalix
Braylon
Hunt.
Trice is still out there. Interesting. Okay. Huh. There's no shot that Jordan Morgan's out there. He's a tackle.
Offensive tackle
Yeah,
or a defensive tackle.
offensive.
Oh yeah, Jordan Morgan for Arizona. Yeah, he was early.
Yeah, okay. This
And
is
you
a
already
tough
got your
one.
guard. I like that
Peep
Jackson
wide
Powers
receiver for
Davis.
me, if you don't mind.
Not at all. And then we can
Hmm.
scroll down because there's a lot of names here.
Hmm. It's a deep wide receiver class.
For sure. Like even some of these guys like Roman Wilson, Jalen McMillan, Johnny Wilson, the 6'7" guy. Like there's a lot
Yeah.
of fun names here. Obviously Luke McCaffrey, Brendan Rice. So I know Jacob
So
Coing from
if I'd have
Arizona.
seen, if I would have seen that TJ Tampa had gotten um, drafted already, I would have probably
Mm-hmm.
accepted that Green Bay trade that was 88 for 91, or
Mm-hmm.
it was yeah, this one for 88 and 91, and I would have
Yeah.
probably taken Jalix Hunt and then
Because
drafted
yeah.
like the best wide receiver at that point. But obviously, we already rejected it, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take. I'm just gonna take Jalix Hunt early in this one,
Okay.
just cause.
Yeah, and like these
But
rankings are interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and he would be a really great fit for us. He's just a big dude. I mean, you can pull up his card. Oh, it already went past it, but
Yeah.
he would fit really well alongside Bosa. I think the two of them would work well together. He's kind of similar to Chase Young, but I think he's got a bit better of a work, whatever it's called, work
Work ethic.
ethic. Yeah, there it is.
Okay, let's see. All right. So our last pick for you here. Would you like to trade back 94 and a seventh
Nah,
for
reject that.
105? Nah. Perfect. And I think that's it. So what position would you like to look for here?
Go wide receiver. Give
So
me
we're
Brendan
talking about
Rice,
like
baby.
late round three. We'll take Brendan
Yeah.
Rice. Legacy pick. We love it. So I
And
love
Brendan Rice
that.
realistically would probably still be available in round four,
Hmm.
but just with the way that this draft went, like I kind of knew the guys I wanted, and considering they weren't out there, um, I kind of pushed the draft ahead. Like I said, I mean, paying closer attention, I would have seen the guys get drafted, and I would have
Hmm.
probably accepted some of those trades and worked it out differently. But happy overall.
Yeah. So and same and like again, it's hard again when it's a little bit up and down, a little inconsistent. Um, So I think we're done with our mock draft exercise. I think that was fun.
Does it
If you're
grade
down
your
to just kind of,
drafts?
it doesn't. This isn't like the PFF one,
Uh,
and I would do the PFF one, but it won't let us do that much, and it's not free, so it sucks.
yeah.
Like there's a free version, but it's limited, and I was like, I kind of want one that
Hmm.
allows us to do it a little bit more because I would totally do that. I like the
Yeah.
grades too, so maybe next year that's something we look into.
Yeah,
Okay,
that would be
so
fun. I had an A draft earlier because I ran just a for fun mock draft and I had
mm-hmm,
an A draft earlier and I was like, oh okay, I would be really hyped if I got this draft, but I
right.
it's gonna be a tough one because like we keep having to say like these mock drafts, the way that the computer does it, it's not gonna go down this way at all. Like it's gonna be totally different. Um, but yeah,
But that's what makes mock drafts. That's what make mock drafts so fun because like it's all over the place. There's so many things that can happen. We're never gonna really know what's gonna happen until it does. And that, I think there's so much. I understand that some people would think it's like kind of meaningless, but I think it's fun to just have these exercise, have these thoughts. So let's talk prospects because, there's only so much we could have done on that mock draft. So you said your top kind of options were like cornerback, offensive line, and defensive line, is what you said? Or wide receiver. You said wide receiver,
Wide
yeah.
receiver, yeah.
So let's talk about a few of those guys. Like, who would you see and who would you be okay with if the Niners ended up bringing in some of these guys? Who would you be cool with if they ended up drafting them versus what we did in our simulation?
So a lot of the guys that I'm really interested in, um, let's put it this way. So I would want to, with the first pick as the Niners, I'd want to, if he's still out there, draft Kool-Aid McKinstry. And I mean, the biggest reason for that, like, he's not the most athletically gifted guy, but he is really smart. Like, his IQ is off the charts. That's really what he's kind of praised for. And he can fit in a ton of different schemes defensively. And when I think of like that Brandon Stanley defense, like, he's had some baller cornerbacks for him in the past. Like Jalen Ramsey is one of them. He's had multiple really good ones. So he kind of leans on his cornerbacks, and specifically for guys who are really smart in that position. So I think a guy like Kool-Aid would be perfect for him and for his scheme that he's trying to build here. But that's a guy that, like, he could go like the pick before us kind of thing. So it's
Yeah.
like, if he falls to us, like, awesome. I think he'll probably be the guy that we take. I really do. But it's really up in the air, right? And that's the fun of the draft. But the other cornerback I really liked, I kind of said it already, was Mike Sainstro. I can't say his last name.
Sanders still, I
Sainristil.
think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
out of Michigan.
It's okay.
He has a great skill set, and his mentality is awesome. He basically comes in as like a potential starting slot corner, and and that's something that, like, especially with Deandre Lenore and Chavarius, with their contracts being up in at the end of this coming season, like, to be able to get some reps in here to learn an offense, or rather a defense in the NFL, and then roll into your second year as one of the starter guys, like, it could work out really well if that's a guy we choose to go with. But um, in terms of like the offensive tackle, both guys that I want, we would have to trade up for, and that's kind of the
Oh,
the
okay.
tough situation, because the first guy in my number one option is Tylese Fuaga, and he's probably going to go somewhere between pick 10 to 15 is my guess. I think the latest mock draft had him at 11, if I remember right. Um,
Hmm.
and he's awesome. He's like a starting caliber plug and play type player, and he's strong mentality. Dude's an absolute unit. Um, he's he's like the top athlete at that position. Like, he's so sought after for his build and everything. Great length, great foot speed. Um, his footwork and his IQ is high. Like, he's super strong. And when I think about schematically, like, Oregon all this year, they pounded the rock on the ground all year long. Like, they were known for that. And so
Hmm.
that run scheme, he already has like engraved in his brain. And so I think about him being a plug and play player on a team that, traditionally runs the ball a lot more than they throw. And who knows, that might change, but if you end up trading away Brandon Aiyuk, you could very well be running the ball a lot more as you start to figure out if your wide receiver that you draft is someone you can actually throw the ball to. So,
Right.
so just some interesting things like that. In terms of wide receiver, this one was hard for me because I really only want to dive into wide receiver if we were trading Brandon Aiyuk. The way I
Right.
view
That
it
makes sense.
is, on the table right now, straight up, the only guy I want to draft if we keep Brandon Aiyuk is Rice's son. Like, and that's it. Because we really only need that wide receiver 4 for this year, and then he can fill that wide receiver 3 for the next year. Like,
Hmm.
that would be ideal. Now, if we trade Brandon Ayuk, then I need to start looking into the top wide receivers. And are we going to get the high enough round one pick to get one of those guys like Aroma Dunze or Malik Neighbors from LSU? Like, obviously, they're going to go really early in the draft.
Top
But
10, yeah, for sure.
yeah, but it really depends who's going to pull that trigger and trade for Brandon Aiyuk. Like, do you bank on these wide receiver, this class being as deep as it is as early on, or do you pull that trigger, trade your very early round one pick and a little less on the backside and know exactly who you're getting for Brandon Ayuk? So if I really had to put it, like, I could see us getting like Adonai Mitchell out of Texas, and I really like him just for his size. Like, he's super big. Like, he kind of reminds me of DK in a lot of ways, and I think one of like something like that would be awesome. Obviously, anybody who can run a route similar to BA, because then it's you can kind of plug the same plays. But
Hmm.
it's tough to say not knowing what's going to happen on draft day with Brandon Ayuk. So
No, that makes
that's what I got.
perfect sense. No, that's cool. Those are all great guys. Um, I think on the Eagles side of things, so obviously Cooper DeJean was one of my top guys that I would have picked had we stayed at 22, because I think if we do, which I know for a fact we're not going to stay at 22. If we do stay at 22, he would most likely be the guy that's in that range. Now, the Eagles
Mhm.
are supposedly in the hunt for a corner. So, if that's going to happen, we're going to go after one of those top 3 guys, and my top 3, because there's consensus on who, the top 5 would be considered, um, in no particular order. It could be Quinyon Mitchell, Terry and Arnold from Alabama, and Quinyon Mitchell's from Toledo, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Nate Wiggins from Clemson, and Cooper. Those would be kind of the top 5 in this draft class, and they could all theoretically go in the first round. And if it were me personally, the top 2 guys in this class have kind of separated themselves in terms of pure corners. It would be Quinyon Mitchell and Terry and Arnold. Now, there's been a lot of connections to Terry and Arnold because the Eagles have been rumored to be able to potentially move up even as far as 16 with Seattle and potentially make a trade up there, because John Snyder and Howie know each other really well and have traded with each other before. And it kind of makes sense for both sides. Um, so if the Eagles do trade up, I would say that they're most likely getting Terry and Arnold, who would be personally my favorite cornerback prospect realistically, because I love Quinyon Mitchell. Like, I think he's awesome. I do think he is the best corner in this class for a reason, but I think he's going to be up there within like the top 12 range. I think he'll be gone by then. So to trade up that far would be pretty tough. Although there was rumored as late as today that Denver, who is in 12th, was talking to the Eagles about trading back. So that was also an interesting conundrum too. So who knows? So for me, if I were to have my pick in the first round, it would be one of those 3 corners. Now, knowing Howie Roseman, you can never rule out an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. If we stayed at 22 or traded back in the first round, one of my potential guys who was mocked super early on our little draft thing, but I think realistically is going to go a little further down, would be Laiatu Latu, the defensive end from UCLA.
Yeah.
He's a veteran player. He is the most skilled defensive end in this class, and the only reason he's not a top 5 pick is because in 2021 he medically retired from football during his time when he was up there in Washington. He got a second opinion, went and played in UCLA and just dominated, and he stayed healthy. So, and he's slightly older, I understand, because he took the extra year, but he would be we just traded Hassan Reddick for nothing, a 6th round pick, and it was more of just kind of like, we're prepping for the future. We signed Bryce Hupp, we still have Josh Sweat, but we have Brandon Graham, Nolan Smith, and that's the rest of our depth. So I'm not going to be surprised if we draft a guy. So if it was a first round guy, Laiatu Latu would be the guy for me, no question. But another guy that's been rumored is Chop Robinson from Penn State. They have I'm gonna say his name wrong. Addy at Isaac from Penn State, I believe, is where he's at too. Another edge rusher, similar. Um, but those would be kind of my guys on the defensive line. On the offensive line, if the Eagles trade up, they're trading up for potentially J.C. Latham, the big man out of Alabama, and that dude's a monster. That's a perfect Howie guy. Another guy that they would consider if they fell back or traded back would be Amarian Mims from Georgia, another Georgia guy, but that's just a big man who can move. That's exactly the kind of replacement for Lane Johnson that the Eagles would look for. So it's like you think about the Eagles have kind of options to play with. They can go defensive end, they can go corner, or they can look for a future replacement on the offensive line. But they have also been known to do that all over the place, not just in the first round. So I mean, Jason Kelsey was a late round pick, but Lane Johnson was a top 5 pick. So it kind of does depend. So the Eagles could go a lot of ways here, and it wouldn't surprise me if they drafted any one of those guys. But if they also did draft any one of those guys, I'm totally okay with that. So in the later rounds, I'm looking for like, potentially a Brendan Rice as well. We also have Max Melton would be a nice corner if we don't get one of the guys early on. I think Max Melton's a nice little slot corner for Rutgers. He's visited the Eagles as well. So it's like it's there's options on the board that because the Eagles made the moves that they made and stacked up offensively that we don't really need to prioritize. Like we don't kind of have the freedom of choice. We're aiming for specific spots. We have the defensive line, offensive line, or corner slash safety. Those would be the kind of options that we would work at best. And there's no first round linebacker in this class, like we've alluded to. So it's like we'll probably get those guys later on, and hope that one of them develops into something nice. But those would be kind of the guys that I would go for. So my favorite guys would be any one of the 3 corners that are my top 3: Terrion, Quignon, or Cooper DeJean. Those would be insane, and I would be ecstatic. But any one of the guys that I've mentioned outside of like maybe Chop Robinson, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I'd be okay with us getting as well.
There's a lot of
So
prospects. I love you. You always dive so deep into the draft, and you do it for the NFL. You do it for the NBA. Like for anybody listening, like Marcos is such a nerd when it comes to the draft, and he'll just dive so deep on some players and like give me backgrounds on stuff. He'll be like, "Oh yeah, you're interested in him? Well, like this is really good because blah 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 blah." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, yeah, no, for sure." And then like sells me on an idea, or he's like, "Oh, I'm surprised you do that instead of like so and so." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know that's a great idea, great point." No, it's impressive, bro. Like your knowledge behind like how much you build such a knowledge for each draft because you do so much research into all these guys, because obviously we don't watch college ball like that much. We'll watch a lot of the big games maybe, and like any matchups and stuff that seem like they're like top line, right? But like
mhm.
Marcos and I don't watch college sports that much. Like he'll tune into Arizona men's basketball because like that's your thing, right? Um
Yeah.
but like yeah, man, it's so impressive to hear you talking about like all these different prospects and just going as deep as you do. I mean, the Eagles would be lucky to have you in their office. I'll just say that.
Oh, dude, I think about all the times I'd be a GM. That'd be so fun. I think that'd be the best job on the planet, whether it's NBA or NFL. I think I could build a good roster if they gave me the opportunity. But no, it's fun. I
Yeah.
think it's like you said, we don't watch college sports all the time, but there's always enough highlights. There's enough information out there where I'm just like, I want to know who's going to be in our range. I want to know any guy that would make sense. And I was doing it for both teams because there's going to be guys that we're going to be that potentially work for both teams. So it's fun. I think it's fun diving into these guys. Like for the NBA draft, I'm going to go nuts. I'm going to look at any of those guys that would make sense, even though, we'll talk later. I don't believe that we'll keep our pick this year, but either way, but it's fun.
Yeah.
I love the pre-draft process. I love learning about it because it helps me kind of picture the off season of, okay, we would make a good decision if we did this, or maybe we could try and avoid this situation, but it wouldn't be surprising if they did. So it helps me learn more about how we do business, how our teams operate, and it's just fun knowing that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, and it's
it's
always
definitely
fun to
fun.
see too, like your top prospects every time you say it. Like for example, like you named a whole bunch of guys going into the NBA season and the NBA draft. You're like, I want to see the Kings draft like this guy and this guy and this guy. We didn't draft any of those guys, and all those guys panned out being like actual really good role players for those teams. And I was like, yeah, this is impressive for sure. So definitely a nod to you, bro.
Thanks, dude. Yeah, no, I'm excited, and now we'll get to be in this process together. So you can, maybe I can get you more involved in it so we can mess around and
Yes.
like pick our guys and like say, okay, this guy's going to be good, even if they're not on our team. That's also the fun thing to see because it does, like you said, it does validate me a little bit. Like I wasn't sure. That was kind of my first time in the NBA draft, like really just picking guys because this was for behind the curtain. This was before we actually did the pod. We were practicing, getting things kind of figured out, just to see how everything kind of worked. So I did one where I just listed all the guys that I thought would work for the Kings, and showed it to Ben and Ryan and just said, "Hey, this is how it looks. What do you guys think?" And yeah, it was cool. It was a lot of fun, and to see half of those guys like really pan out and were actually contributing now it was fun for sure.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah.
So on a totally separate note now, you asked
Hmm.
me what I think percentage wise the odds of Brandon being traded tomorrow is. I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you think the
Ooh.
chances are? Not before this deal or anything like that. I'm talking right
Hmm.
now, going into this draft tomorrow. What do you think the chances are that Brandon Aiyuk is a 49er after tomorrow?
After tomorrow, oh god, I think it would be pretty high. Honestly, I would say at the absolute, I think it's 75 to 80% chance he's still a Niner, and that still feels a little low to me. I think it's probably more likely that he will be than won't be, because I just don't see anybody. I don't see anybody getting to the Niners of like what they want, unless the only way I can see it is if the board fell a certain way and like certain trades happened early where the Niners were like, oh my god, our guy's going to be available, and then they make that trade. But like
Yeah.
so rarely does that happen where all the boards where the board falls how you want it to. So I would say he's most likely going to be a Niner tomorrow. For the future, I don't know how much it's going to cost, which that'll be the bigger question after tomorrow when all the dust has settled. And obviously, the tomorrow is what matters because tomorrow they're only showing the first round. So if you're not trading Brandon Ayuk for a first round pick, you're not getting him for a second round player. Like that's just not that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Um, so after tomorrow, if Brandon Ayuk's still on the roster, now it'll just be a matter of when the hell they sign him. That's gonna be the scary part because he'll hold out. Like he will hold out. Like this is the NFL. Guys hold out all the time. So
Yep.
it's a bummer. So I would say
I
he's gonna be a Niner after tomorrow for sure.
I think that's safe. I think your percentage is a little more realistic. I say the 40 because I look at what it's going to cost to keep Brandon Ayuk here, after seeing what happened in Detroit. And I'm looking at the 49ers future and who we're going to have to pay, and it's just there does seem a scenario where the Niners kind of look at it and they go, "Look, I mean, we love the production we get out of Brandon, but this is a deep wide receiver class, and so, the Jaguars are offering me the 17th pick right now for him. Okay, I think our guy is still available. We're at the 10th pick right now. Our guy's still out there. Let's do it. Let's pull the trigger," kind of thing. So it does rely heavy on how the board falls. Like you said, that's going to be probably 100% of how this plays into it. I think if there's going to be a move, it's going to happen within the first like 4 or 5 picks, 6 picks.
I think it'll be interesting for sure because like for Brandon, you make a good point too that it's like when you think about the Niners as a whole, you have Kyle Shanahan, and that dude game plans with anybody who's there. His offense is built to have anybody operated, and obviously it works when you have Debo and when you have everybody in there. But let's be honest, he can operate that offense with anybody. So that's going to be something to think about too. Is like, oh, maybe we get Brandon Ayuk for a first round pick and then a future pick, and that future pick ends up being something that we can leverage to get even better in the future with cheaper contracts with good guys, so who can equal out that production with multiple players. So that definitely, there is a world where Brandon Ayuk could end up being a part of a trade tomorrow, and that wouldn't surprise us either. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It'll definitely be lingering, and I know that it's going to be in the back of your head until the Chiefs pick at the very end there.
Yeah. So the next episode that has Brandon Ayuk on the cover is either going to say Brandon Ayuk is traded or Brandon Ayuk has signed an extension with the Niners. So we'll see what happens there. I'm I'm stoked, man. I'm really excited for the draft. Tomorrow's going to be just a badass day. I'm excited.
I know the draft's always fun. Like I don't care how long it takes. Like the anticipation you get, like it's so fun. I love the draft, whether it's the NBA or the NFL. Um, I understand that it shouldn't take 3 hours to pick 32 dudes, but that's just how it works. And
It is.
it'll be fun though. I'm excited for what's going to happen, and you know, I'm anticipating some craziness. I wouldn't be surprised with some of these names and all these names that they hype up, like, you know, the JJ McCarthy's and stuff like that. I'm not going to be surprised if they don't get picked top five like everyone thinks they're going to, because everyone throws their smoke screen. Like, that's what draft season is. It's just smoke and drama and nonsense that isn't actually going to happen at the end of the day. I think there was a stat
Right.
that one of the stat keepers from the Ringer looked up what it was like only 3 draft picks each year are made in the first round by teams that didn't originally own that pick, whether it was via trade from a year prior. It wasn't even like just within the draft. So, you know, we could, like, for example, like this year there's already one with, you know, the Bears picking first. That is a traded pick from Carolina. So it's like things like that, that's what they consider. So it doesn't happen as often as people project it to all the time. So it makes sense in a vacuum, but some teams just actually don't pull the trigger. But it's all information that they're getting. So
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
So any final thoughts before we enter the nerve-wracking world that is the draft tomorrow and see who's on our roster?
I'm just excited to add more talent. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
this is the fun part. Like from a fan perspective, is watching these young men get drafted in, and you just get to add talent to your team, see who pans out, like what's a good pick, what's not a good pick, and it's exciting. And it's exciting for these guys too, like who are entering the league. They have been working for that their whole life. Like it's a special day. So just stoked for it.
Yeah, and we'll definitely go over our, who our team selects. I think what we'll do is we'll most likely do it next week, what after all the picks have been made and we have an idea of who we really liked from our picks, and we'll go over that. We most likely won't go through every single pick that our teams make. We'll go through our ones that we think will make the most impact, that mean the most, that maybe it was one of our guys, so we can, you know, be excited about that too. So it'll be interesting to see. All
Definitely.
right. So, with that being said, this was episode 39 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13 at gmail.com. Hit us up on any of our social medias: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, X, Facebook. All the links for the descriptions for each are down below. And again, for those who are audio listeners and want to check out our mock draft, check out our reactions as we go, and just follow along with us and seeing our faces, you can check us out on YouTube. We have our link in the description below as well. And again, rate the show, leave a review, give us a like, subscribe, all that fun jazz. Help the show out. We'd love to grow with you guys. So, with that being said, I'm Marcos Conan Negron. Beside me here, as always, is.
Benny the Jet, baby.
All right, guys, we love y'all. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.
Peace.